NIO with 1,700 insurance registrations for the second week in January. That's from January 8th through the 14th in China. I've got the playlist pulled up because obviously this is a much lower number than what we've seen recently. And now let's move over to look at the actual breakdown. My first thought when I saw the numbers was, okay, is the breakdown of the vehicle sales, the models that NIO has, is it consistent with what we've seen? So for example, I wanted to look and see if the ET5s and the ES6 were the main sellers. They were. We've got 630 units of the ES6 shown, and then 560 of the ET5s. Then the EC6, which has become sort of the fourth best seller. I say four because there are two different ET5 models represented here. So that's the number 4 seller for NIO, and that's kind of the trend that we've seen, except that this is obviously a fall off from even the previous week. So what does this mean? More on that in a second. The ES8, ET7, EC7, and ES7 with 180 units. Let's keep it moving though. I just want to get through as much as I can. I've got a number of tabs lined up that I'd like to cover and talk briefly about. This is something of note that came out a little later. NIO doing vehicle discounts because they're coming out with 2024 models with upgraded configurations set to be delivered in early March. And so one of the things NIO is going to do is offer discounts for basically the vehicles like the showroom vehicles, the vehicles that they can now move out as old inventory. And that's crazy to me when you think about old inventory being vehicles that are actually still brand new. That's pretty wild. But it speaks to, I think, the level of service and product that NIO wants to be offering its users. And I think there is an attraction point of that. Now, the question is, does that justify or offset the lower numbers? I don't know. And I think that 1 week is way too limited of a view to try and make that determination. But how about this now as well? When I saw this breakdown, my first thought was, wow, look at Huawei with the number 1 spot, or tied number 1 with Li Auto popping up there. And this is something I talked about before. You see over here, Huawei, the Aido. This is one of the smartphone companies from China. And I wondered how they would do when they got into the space, the EV space. And obviously they're doing okay. So this is, look, I'm really glad that NIO is positioned where it is, even though it's still early, even though they're still doing massive build up and build out of infrastructure. And although the argument that some will make is NIO has too many things going on, that's why I like them. That gives them a much bigger potential global market. And so as we see, if we see companies like Huawei do really well in the EV space, I think it's a nod to NIO being kind of ahead of the game in the way that they have moved. But I don't think we're going to know that for a while yet. So with that in mind, I also noted that some other companies had sort of lower numbers than what they had been reporting recently. So I think beginning of the year, we've got a few different dynamics in play. I'll probably talk a little bit more about that in just a second. But I'd like to move to this now. So it's Wednesday morning. It's 9 a.m. as I record this, my time, Central Standard Time. I haven't even looked at what NIO stock is doing. It's probably down as far as the stock price today, and based on what happened from Tuesday. And this was Tuesday night. Tuesday evening, I just said NIO videos tomorrow. I'm hoping to get a couple out today. I wanted to see what others were saying about today. Big sell-off. And so I wanted to just kind of put this out there. I like to sit back and observe and see what sentiment is and see what others are saying and thinking. And so I actually tuned into Mr. P. I checked out one of his videos, and then Stealth Wealth Investing. I actually watched 2 of his videos because I had missed the last couple. And so I was curious what he was saying. And then I also, this morning, I saw that Caddy with Moneyvesting had put out a video and highlighted NIO, talked about NIO and Tesla. So I wanted to see what he was saying. And here's my takeaway from that. Mr. P, I asked him a question because he was talking about how he thinks that maybe we'll only see about 10,000 on the delivery side from NIO in the month of January. And so I just asked him, how do we know how NIO is doing in the 300,000 RMB and above price range for BEVs? That's battery electric vehicles. That's the piece that I'd like to see NIO continue to compete at a high level in. They are, and I've shared this chart before, this breakdown, the highest 3 price ranges are where NIO's vehicles sell, all of them ranked in the top 7 within this sub-segmented piece of the market, the battery electric vehicles from basically the 42,000 USD price range and above. And so that's where they're competing. Now, if Aido or Li come out with some products that are going to start competing with NIO and taking some of that segment, that piece of the market away from NIO, I'd like to be aware of that. I don't think it's the case, at least not yet. So this is kind of bigger picture overview. I like to keep that in mind. But then if we go back to Stealth Wealth Investing, I had missed his last two videos. I've seen his videos and commented several times over the years, and I hadn't been to his channel in a long time. And both of his videos, I really didn't recognize that he was doing any actual due diligence. I'm sorry, this is not a shot. This is just disconnect from the company as far as I can tell. And so that's what it is. I'd like to know that. And that tells me that someone's going to be very reactive, especially when they see stock price beaten down as it has been. So not surprising by what he said, but really there was no in-depth insight offered there. So I just dropped a quick comment saying NIO is a unicorn. And those who see it or get it have probably done the research and spent hundreds, if not thousands of hours digging into this company and recognizing there's a lot more going on. And so it may need more time for that to be fleshed out and made obvious to people. Also, Caddy with Money Vesting, the last couple times I've been to his channel, I was just curious what his take would be on, for example, the second and third quarter earnings from NIO. He's been trailing for a long time and not really seeing what the company's doing. So I offered kind of a tidbit, a hint in the comment section on his video this morning. And I just said, that NIO has already flirted with profitability, and only one analyst even covering NIO caught that in the last earnings call. So check out the transcript. I've covered it a couple times in videos here, but the fact that even of all the analysts covering NIO, only one recognized that, it speaks to the fact that there's huge disconnect. And that is consistent with what I saw from these YouTubers and even from analysts, even those covering NIO. So with that in play, and that being the case, we have to be aware as investors that this thing is subject to more shorting, more suppression, more whatever. This also matters. And this is why I highlighted this. I liked this. If you're not following me on Twitter, I'll go back to my Twitter page so you can check that out. I'll drop all the links for everything I'm sharing in the description. So go down below if you want to check them out there too. This was of note and something that look, for me, it's kind of like becoming aware. I want to have some awareness of what different things could be going on. This absolutely could be playing in with what we've seen, not just with NIO, but with Chinese stocks overall. So having that awareness, it's nice to highlight things like this. Also, this is a retired fund manager. He's based in Singapore, and I follow him. I've actually cut down the folks I'm following to about 70, and a number of those are folks who I'm just supporting because, the NIO interest. And so the few that I'm following for a very specific purposes to learn or get access to things like this. And he's talking about and has been suggesting that we have to watch things like the IWM. That's the growth stocks, if you will, the smaller caps, and see if that's going to drop, if we are going to be in a recession, if we're already in a recession, if we're going to have issues. We're seeing some of the same types of things that played out back in the 2006 to 2008 era. And that includes on the real estate side of things. I was an investor back then and had a front row seat at all the craziness. There's a reason I started covering and sharing things like the foreclosure initiations from the point of May in 2023 on until present. And so in 2023, for example, we had over 270,000 foreclosures initiated here in the US. But there's a lag time of a couple of years on when most of these are being taken back as repossessions. And part of this is we're still dealing with the fallout and the delays from the pandemic era. So we don't have any idea or understanding of what the real inventory is going to look like when all these properties do come back, and what markets are going to have a lot of properties versus those that don't. So there's a lot of uncertainty. Here's maybe the biggest thing, and I've talked about this before, but I got to mention it again just because it matters. It absolutely matters what the Federal Reserve and Jerome Powell and those folks are going to do. I had said a couple of years ago when Jerome Powell was talking about, wanting to see the housing market correct in the United States, basically it was unsustainable, the overinflated pricing that we were having. And part of that was a result of the low interest rates. And then there was a lot of FOMO buying, that sort of thing that was going on. But he made that comment, and I was just kind of like, all right, we need to keep an eye on this in 2024. If they do not, if the Federal Reserve does not cut interest rates, that's going to put a lot of pressure on consumers, but also on banks and also on investors. It's going to change what folks are doing. And if we at the same time have a recession, and at the same time have things like a bunch of foreclosures ready to come back into the market or coming back to the market, it's an election year. And so the one argument would be, well, it's an election year. Folks are going to make sure things, stay sort of steady through this year, but not necessarily. 2008 was an election year. And so we had a lot of fallout, a lot of stuff that had been building. We've had stuff building, including inventory in the housing market and on the residential side of the business. The commercial side is already getting beat up pretty bad. And so there's just a lot of uncertainty, including the two things that I think are frankly the biggest concerns for me with NIO stock and what NIO stock might do or might not do this year in 2024. If people continue to be as disconnected and kind of clueless about what the company is doing and not even recognizing that they're actually pretty close to profitability, or could be if they would choose to move in that direction and do less build out infrastructure wise R&D, or if they restructure some of what they're doing on the investment side of things. If that is not recognized, and if we have a backdrop of issues with the stock market, volatility overall, and or a recession, and or this issue with the housing market, that could all negatively impact NIO stock price, even though it has nothing to do with the company. But the company fundamentals don't seem to matter, at least not until maybe we see NIO get profitable. Now, can this thing run? Of course, we've seen it run before. And about 7 months back in 2020, we saw it run from $2 to over $60 or 50 something dollars. And then it went further before coming back. And even back in the fall of 2021, when I highlighted and talked about the suspicious short that had gotten involved with NIO, Citadel, we had to keep an eye on them. That was back when the stock price was trading above $40. And what we've seen since then is carnage. It's just been brutal. So maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe it does. Maybe folks should pay more attention to those things. And maybe it's just still really early with a lot of disconnect, and folks, even the analysts covering NIO, not really aware of just what the company is doing. This really hard to grasp because it's such a juggernaut in the making kind of a company. And that's why I call it a unicorn. Uni being one, there's only one company like this. It has pieces or elements of other companies that have been very successful, but this company is unique. And so there is going to be some disconnect just from that. But then when I also see analysts even covering NIO missing things, I'm just kind of like, wow, who knows what this year is going to bring? If NIO does not choose to show profitability, or if the deliveries and the release of sub-brand, let's say, are subpar by what they're hoping to see and get out, then, let's see what the numbers look like. But at the bottom of the screen, I've got it. The 3 first major growth phases for me, which should make it pretty clear that this was always long-term for me. This was a years out kind of thing. I think it's going to take longer than I initially thought, but I also think the global market potential is much bigger. And so I'm good with that, but that's just me. And that's why I wanted to share my thoughts and also share some of what I'm seeing and thinking as I observe what others are doing, not doing, the disconnect and that sort of thing. I think it's pretty widespread, but that's okay. I mean, as an investor, you got to do what works for you, whatever that is. And if your risk tolerance isn't there, if you haven't done the research, if you haven't done proper deep dive due diligence, then, I would understand why you'd have a lot more concern than, for example, what I have. But I also have a pretty high risk tolerance. So with that in mind, let me just say, have a great day. And hopefully I can get back with more content soon. Thanks. I better go check on the NIO stock price now, see just how bad it is.